You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Hello, welcome to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. It's Saul Muerte here again, leading you through our podcast discussions of films, both old and new. And we are going to start, we're almost like slightly at the beginning of season 7. You would have heard, hopefully, some of the previous podcast discussions we've had so far. But we're going to change tack a little bit now. We're going to go back to looking at the canon of work that John Carpenter produced. Avid listeners out there who followed us for a little while will know that when we first started our podcast sessions, we started looking at his early work. We called it the early years. And basically, we were looked at the years starting with Dark Star and ending with The Thing, which was, in our point of view, was like the big turning point in his career. The next film that would follow up from that would be in 1983, and that's going to be the subject of this film now, which is Christine. And those that know Stephen King's work know that it was based on that book about the Plymouth Fury, bright red, that's a little bit possessed, shall we say, and goes on a killing frenzy. But we are going to be looking at the rest of Carpenter's work throughout the rest of this season now. So those of you listening to us, this is where we're going to start looking through some of his career. And if we look back at the ones that we've discussed so far, this guy had a phenomenal hit rate. So like we mentioned Dark Star at the beginning, as we said, and then he would then follow that up with Assault on Precinct 13 before his big breakout film, which was Halloween. 2 years following that, he would do The Fog, and then literally the next year was Escape from New York. The next year was The Thing. The next year was Christine, which we're about to talk about. Then Starman would follow the year after. He took a year break in 1985. We don't know what he was doing, but he took a year out before he then came back and did Big Trouble in Little China. Following year, he did Prince of Darkness, and then he did They Live, and that rounds out the 1980s. So, like, he was churning some good stuff out here. So we're going to be looking at those core films, but we're even going to push further, and we're going to go up right to his last film, which is called The Ward. And we hope that you enjoy the discussions we go along the way. Those that are new to the scene and want to know what Surgeons of Horror is all about, essentially, like as I said, we dissect and discuss these films, and we're using John Carpenter's work as our driving force through this particular season to discuss his work. But essentially, that's what we do. We look at the films one by one in each episode. We dissect and discuss them, and we talk about nostalgic element, where we were when we first watched the film, what we felt was good at the time, and whether that still sits with us. And then when we've kind of talked about the narrative and the little kind of key points that have happened throughout the film that still register, we kind of have a look at whether or not we think the film still stands strong today, and whether we would recommend it to a modern film-going audience. That's us. That's the size of us, Surgeons of Horror. So without further ado, as I said, I'm your lead surgeon for the podcast, and I'm going to have somebody alongside me at the moment who will talk through this particular film of Christine, and that's none other than Watch It Wombat's Nick Allford. And I'd like to welcome him back to the fray in order to discuss these films. Thanks for coming aboard. But I should mention Watch It Wombat. So you're that's your baby. That's what you live and breathe. And that part of that is that you kind of post a lot of mini reviews around not just films but shows, and it's not just horror. It's across the board of entertainment, and you have a few other kind of offsiders as well with Play It Wombat and things like that, where you look at the gaming circuit too. So welcome on board, and it's good to have you.
Thank you very much. Always great to be here, mate. Always good for a chat. Yeah, good. Looking forward to, as always, getting stuck in and reliving a few memories, which is funny. With this one, I don't have many, but I have just finished watching it now, so I've got some very fresh memories that we can chat about.
Yeah, so like you talked about how you had like lots of fresh memories and things like that, and because you've just watched it, I always ask this to my offsider. Is first, before we kind of start dissecting the film or ripping it apart and dissecting it and looking at the key points, sometimes we don't go just purely on narrative. Sometimes we cherry pick those moments that stood out. And that tends to be the way that you and I work when we do our podcast. But from your perspective, what, like, do you remember when you first watched it? Because you kind of just said then that you kind of were vaguely aware of it but it wasn't one that was fresh in your mind.
Yeah, I remember watching it relatively young. It's funny because Christine's actually my mum's name as well. It's a bit weird. But yeah, I watched it quite young, and I don't remember. It's not like there were any iconic moments that even stood out for me. Like on when I was preparing to watch it, I was trying to think what I knew about the film. For me, it was like watching it for the first time again a bit, because I was aware of the characters, I was aware of what the car did. But yeah, it's I think for me, I wasn't extremely excited to watch it, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
Because for me, in my mind, it was just, okay, there's a car that goes around and kills people and sounds a little bit silly, which I think that's what I do remember as a kid, thinking, okay, it's a killer car. That sounds a bit, a little bit funny. Which I have, sort of, kind of on subject, is I have the same sort of feeling about Carrie. Like, I remember seeing the original version as a kid, but all I can really picture it to is just one film leading up to one moment,
Yes, the end bit,
No, I don't want to spoil it if you haven't seen it. But yeah, the ending, which most people are familiar with.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's kind of that, for me, when I think of a film like that, it doesn't make me want to watch it again, because it's just like, it's just leading up to one moment.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Which I kind of get with a lot of M. Night Shyamalan movies. Like, they are quite good films, most of them. But you do feel like you're just waiting for that one sort of payoff.
Yeah, sure.
Which means I probably need to watch Carrie again. But
Lexi, I think I get what you're saying with that, but my argument about Carrie is that it's a lot of it's like a big psychological journey that Carrie White goes through, and it's a huge gaslighting thing as well. Like, her mum has led her to believe a certain way of life for so long, so that when she becomes a woman for the first time, then her whole world just shatters. It's like, and obviously you throw in the fact that she has these supernatural abilities that get kind of ignited in the process, that kind of lends weight to it. So I have a lot of time for that. But having said that, I think that's stuff that I've come to appreciate over time when on repeat viewing. I think I may have had a similar reaction when I first watched it, like that you were talking about for Carrie. With Christine, and I'm coming from a point of view because I absolutely devoured Stephen King books when I was young. Like, I just literally, you'd see me in, with the Stephen King book all the time, a massive book collection of his work.
You were that kid at school who had a book that's like, the size of the Bible, or big,
pretty much.
Yeah. And it's just like,
yeah, that's it.
I was there with like a wafer thin comic.
that's pretty much the size of it. Yeah, I just couldn't get enough. Like, I loved like the summer holidays, because that's when I could pick, because Stephen King books are notoriously quite long, particularly like The Stand and things like that. But I loved the summer holidays because I knew I could pick up one, and I knew there's a surefire job that I'd complete it before the end of the holidays. But so it was always the big one for me as a kid, and Pet Sematary were both big ones for me as a kid, reading stuff. But I would say Christine was the other one that had a huge impact on me, and I'm talking about the book, not the film.
Because apparently the film came out before the book.
Right, is that right? Yeah, well, they were both. The book apparently was published in.
I could be wrong.
No, the book was published in 1983, so
it would have been close, I guess.
So yeah, you could be right.
Yeah, you were saying that you devoured Christine.
Yeah, and I loved it because it's the journey of it is very different to the film. With the book, it's basically done in 3 parts. And the first part is all told from the point of view from the best friend.
Oh, okay.
He's telling the story of how him and Arnie are, hanging out. Dennis is this jock kind of character, like he's a regular kind of what we call gridiron football, American football is what he plays. And his friend Arnie, who's the core subject of the film, who ends up buying the car Christine. He's a real geek, kind of nerdy character. And you think that would be like a bit of a chalk and cheese kind of connection, but they essentially have known each other since they were kids, like really young. So they've just kind of grown up together. And
it would be nice if they'd have put Sorry, it'd be nice if they put some of that in the film to establish that sort of relationship.
Yeah, see, that's the thing that I found was really missing, especially when I rewatched the film just recently. So my memory, and I'll come back to some of the story novel element in a second, but my memory of the film was quite vague. You know, like I was trying to remember, like it must have been years ago that I watched it, and I was like, I don't really remember much. I remember the ending of it, but I don't remember much of the journey to get to that ending. Like if somebody said to me, do you remember the kills in it? I'd be like, no, I honestly can't remember what happens. So, and I found that a bit telling. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. Why is that? And I was like, maybe the film's not as good as I recall it, but I'm willing to kind of put that to one side when I came to watch it ahead of the podcast record. But I was genuinely still quite excited to watch it because A, Carpenter, and B, I had an affiliation with the novel. And as I said, it's broken into 3 parts. So we see Dennis's story through Arnie buying the car, some early signs of character change, and that he, like the Dennis guy, like digs Lee. We follow that journey like up to the point where Dennis has his footballing accident and he's then stuck in hospital. So obviously, like he's written it from a point of view, then he's kind of incapacitated. He's kind of has to not be involved because he's in hospital recovery, right? So the book then takes a weird shift in that it then starts telling the story from a little bit of Arnie's point of view, but it sounds more like it's more, rather than being first person, it's almost like it's talking about it from a second perspective, like as we're watching Arnie's character, Lee's character, and some of the things that they're experiencing along the way. And so because of that, the tone starts feeling awkward. So like when I reread the book again ahead of the podcast, I really noticed that this time around again. And I was like, oh, that jars a little bit when reading that. So, and then before it then picks up again when Dennis is out of the hospital for the final climax, for the first final act, he's back in and he's telling the story again. From the first perspective. And I think King writes better that way. Like if you look at some of his stuff, it's always the writer's perspective, essentially, that which is quite synonymous with his work. So anyway, the point was I had a real attachment to the novel, and I thought I'm really keen to kind of see this again. So, and when I did, the first thing that struck me, and we'll start dissecting this a bit, as I said now, but like the first thing that struck me was how derogatory they were to women at the very beginning. And
yes,
with the banter and stuff, I was just like, whoa, okay, that isn't good. And I had no idea that was that accepted at the time. I started really kind of scrutinize it literally from that perspective, going, I feel uncomfortable with them really like being very kind of full on the way they're. I mean, we're not talking the way that like John Hughes would write, you know, like we're talking like that, you know, the 80s kind of thing.
Yeah.
John Hughes was famous for being able to see things through teenagers' eyes and capturing the way they talk. It's not that. This just feels awkward. Did you get that too, or?
Oh yeah, I think it was very early on in the film, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's like the first few
car
weeks when we're meeting them, they're talking together at first in the car, but then when they're at the locker scene too, and they're talking about, there's another kid who kind of is in the background who's a bit of an irrelevant kind of bypasser character, and he's talking about like, you know, scoring with this girl, in very kind of lewd terms, and I was just like, maybe it's just my innocence, man, I don't know, but I was just like, I found that whole moment like really awkward to watch.
And I don't know if they were trying to make it age it up a bit, because apparently the story goes that it was to make it not PG because there's not much gore and blood and all, from a horror movie. It's pretty tame in that respect. They drop a lot of C-bombs to help try and get the class up, apparently.
Yeah,
because there's way more C-bombs for a film of that age is pretty rare, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there is that, and that's the thing. I didn't mind it so much when Arnie turns, like when he starts showing characteristics that, you know, that obviously isn't him,
like wearing eyeshadow and stuff.
Yeah, when he goes dark, you know, when he gets all emo and meta, and
when he gets a cool new jacket.
Yeah, that's right. And all of a sudden, he's a cool guy now.
And doesn't need glasses for no
Doesn't
reason.
need glasses anymore. Never needed them. So that struck me as a bit of a moment where I was like, I don't know. I might find this viewing a bit hard. The weird thing is, like, obviously, I'm pretty sure that kind of conversation did occur around that time frame, but I was just really aware of how it jarred. It didn't feel natural. The dialogue didn't feel natural. Like, this isn't Quentin Tarantino spouting kind of out, like dialogue that he does that has this kind of fluidity to it, and can be insulting and incredulous in a fell swoop. It wasn't like that. It just jarred, and so I was just like, oh, okay. If this is what the dialogue's going to be like, this is going to be a pretty rough journey. But it does, as soon as the car element happens, that gets dropped, and so it felt a bit more natural from that point onwards. But I just was like, that's weird, because I realized, like, the intro of the film obviously would kick off with Bad to the Bone, and with the music, and that's taken directly from King, who was known for injecting song lyrics at the head of chapters of his books. And this particular novel does that. Like, at the beginning, there's always like these classic kind of 50s songs lyrics that are in the beginning of most of the chapters to kind of set the scene of where we're set. Yeah.
But apparently, from what I read, the actual conveyor scene of Christine getting built isn't actually in the book. Is that right?
Yeah, it's not in the book. Yeah.
Yeah. So
we don't get to see Christine until that moment where Arnie and Dennis are driving past the driveway, and they see it in the driveway. And so that's the other thing too. That's slightly different as well, in the sense that there's more to that journey when they first get the car. And yes, it's a rust bucket, but Dennis gets a weird vibe from the car straight away, and he gets a weird vibe. And the guy selling the car isn't the brother of the owner; it's actually the owner, who's really old and and like looks exactly the same way. Like, you picture the guy, that plays him, and it's pretty much carbon copy of how the guy that owns the car is described. And he's the old guy.
Sorry. So the old guy from Home Alone. Just
that dude
turns up, bit of creepy exposition.
yeah, that's right. So he kind of looks a bit like that same guy, like, but like the story is the owner is the one that he's selling the car, and Dennis gets that weird vibe, like, I don't trust the dude. He's a bit off, and what's more is the car. There's something about the car, like, itself, and like he's trying to convince Arnie not to buy the car, but Arnie has this moment where he's just instantly falls in love with the car, right? So Arnie goes in the house to sign the papers, and at this point Dennis is checking out the car, and he gets in the car, and he gets the feeling that there's he can't quite put his name on it, but there's like a bad energy about it. And we don't get that part in the film. Like, he doesn't have this kind of weird reaction, like, as in, like, there's something unsuitable about the car, other than the fact in the film it's just that it's a rust bucket, right? But they also have a journey. Like, they take it, they drive it back home, but it's like things like it breaks down halfway there, and there's a big scene where it's parked outside this guy's house, and there's this moment where they have this interaction with this dude that's basically telling to fuck off of his property because there's rust buckets outside his house. So there's all this kind of interaction scene that happens, which is actually kind of cool. It was a cool scene in the book, but obviously to kind of keep the pace going with the film, they cut that bit out.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like there's a whole bit about it, like the struggle of him getting the car, and then eventually, and the amount he puts into the car gets glossed over a lot in the film. Like, they just, because they kind of want to get to the point where it's evil, right? And it starts.
Yeah.
So a lot of that kind of natural character building kind of stuff is put to one side to get to it. And I think that, unfortunately, when watching the film again, like, that is missing, because we're just going through the beats, right? And it doesn't quite connect. So that stood out for me.
I do quite like the way in the film compared to from what you're saying from the book that it is the brother, because it kind of makes a little bit more sense, like to me anyway, in the fact that if Christine's owner was trying to sell her, she'd have something to say about that. And, you know, I think there might, I don't know if this is how it played out in the book, but then the owner would be able to offer more answers, whereas the guy's like, it was my brother's, you know, and he can then tell this story.
Yeah. And so that's the thing, because it takes like the possession part of it is a bit ambiguous, right? So it's like, yes, the car has its own entity, but in the book, the guy, the owner, he actually dies not long after selling the car.
Right.
And it's almost like he realizes is that he's coming to the end of his life, and Christine's willing to let go of him because his body's not going to be able to maintain her for much longer. And then it's almost she possesses Arnie in a way by luring him in. And there's a moment where in the sale itself of the car, the guy Roland, there's a moment where he seems regretful as they drive off. It's like he almost is crying at letting this thing go, and then he passes away. So they don't have the answers of when things start kind of happening. They don't have those answers. So Dennis goes and tracks down the brother, and the brother then is the one that tells the story about how Roland had a wife and they had a kid. The kid died outside the car. Was choking on a burger in the car. So again, and that does is history. That does happen again in the book with Lee later on, and we see that in the film. But it makes sense in the book where it starts to happening because it's like it's something that she can kind of manipulate and take control of. The circumstances that happen within in the car, right? But that happened to their kid, Roland's kid, and then the wife can't bear it anymore, and she actually commits suicide in the car by gassing herself. So those kind of things it's just discussed about, but we get in the book, you kind of get that told. Do you know what I mean? So there's a bit more history at play, and there's a lot more depth to it. And they have to, I get the understanding of the film in that you have to kind of choose which moments to tell and not, and sacrifice stuff in order to get the main gist of it across. But unfortunately, in the throes of this particular book, by removing those kind of deep layers, it becomes very surface. And so it doesn't connect as much as a result. And what's more, the added part of it is that whenever Arnie is in the car, he's not possessed by Christine. He's possessed by Roland, the original owner of the car, who's died.
Oh, is that why?
Okay. So it starts to exhibit characteristics of Roland when he's going around. So the moments where he starts being a bit of a dick, essentially, and being really pissy with the Lee character are moments where he starts being possessed. And when Dennis finally comes out of hospital, he sees this whole personality change with his friend that wasn't there before. And he starts to do a bit of private investigating. And as I said, that's what leads him to talk to the brother. And he gets to know a bit more about what's going on, and realizes there's more to it than that. And it becomes a bit of more of a tragic story by the end of it, because he realizes that he tries to be able to save his friend and hopes he can by confronting Christine at a time when he knows his friend's not going to be there. So if he can tackle Christine on head on, but the problem is that he does that, and I know I'm jumping to the end with the car being destroyed, but then he hears how that same night his Arnie and his mum are killed in a car accident on the highway, and that's kind of told off novel, if that makes sense. We don't actually see that happen. He just hears about it, and he's just like, I've done all this and I wasn't able to save my best friend anyway, but hopefully that's where the evil stops. But then it cuts to in the novel, it cuts to the epilogue, and he's older and he never settles down with Lee. He mentions how they had a bit of a moment where they could have been an item, but they kind of separated and went their own way. She's now married and settled down, and but he's always kind of drifted. But then he's heard of like some weird newspaper stories of stuff about accidents happening, things like that, and it's leading back up to where Lee is living. Now he's followed this trail and he's like, that can't be right. Don't tell me this is that she's not
coming back,
not dead. So it kind of leaves it really open with that, and it does that at the end of this film too. Like there's a heartbeat moment where the thing's crushed up kind of bit of metal, and then we see the bars start to kind of bend a little bit as if
at the end,
like, is it going to start reforming again? So that is a nod to like, is it actually dead or not? But so there's my point with that, and there was a lot of waffling around. But my point is there's a lot of differences that happen with the novel compared to the film, and things that had to be kind of, as I said, cut out the way in order to hit the beats of the film. So it was an interesting journey watching it again, and I found that it didn't always connect, as I said, like the bit at the beginning jarred, and like to go back to the conveyor belt scene, which, as you quite rightly pointed out, isn't in the book. But it was a way for them to kind of say, yeah, this car's a bitch, right? It's going to be, it's got bad stuff, bad voodoo around it, because we see it kind of, the bonnet shut down on the hand and break the guy's hand. And then we have the cigar chomping dude, and he ends up dying in the car at the beginning. So we have like two deaths really early on to just kind of really overemphasize the point that this car's not good. It's evil.
And that's it. And I think that's all part of them as well, like I was saying before, to try and ramp up the horror genre style of it, because otherwise just a car, if you can have it 2 kills in the first few minutes of opening, then that's great.
Yeah, pretty much. And then I guess if we're looking at there's the bully kind of thing. There's always bullies in Stephen King kind of novels, and in this one there's one as well
who's like 40 years old. In fact, most of the kids are like in their mid to late 20s. But this guy, the bully in this one's, I'm like, is that a teacher?
Yeah, it's a bit like that, isn't it? Yeah, there's that whole, that didn't really stick either. And that's the thing too. They had this beautiful moment of I felt where they should have built more up about when Christine goes on a rampage and starts killing the bullies, right? Because the first kill, for want of I'm trying not to use a derogatory kind of term, but the fat kid that's in it,
yes,
right? Yeah. Who's the first one gets killed. That's kind of a bit similar in the way that Christine kind of hunts him down and he's on his own. And that
was a great kill, by the way. That was really cool.
where it traps him in the alleyway and it crushes itself in order to crush him. Yeah,
that's so good. And then you don't see much of it either, and it's just like, okay, well, she can't get in, and he's stuck. And then I think they might have established the reforming the show me stuff by then.
Yes.
Yes. And then so when that does happen, that's obviously in keeping with the world they've set up. She's like, oh shit, she can just do that. Yeah. Go in, and then he's got absolutely no way, because I think it's when you're on the run from the car, I'd imagine you're sort of thinking, how can I get out of this? Like, do I go up a flight of stairs? And
Dalek syndrome. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. But you're also in that comfortable position where you're on the outside looking in, and I'm sure if you were being chased by something like that, you would just want to run in the opposite direction.
Yeah,
you wouldn't have time to think, as laterally as we would maybe. And then that's why when he gets cornered, it's really good. Like he's sat there trapped, and then even, when he's cornered, he pulls out his knife, I think, and he's trying to take it on.
Yeah. That's right.
Good luck with that.
There's I like that. I did like that scene in the film as well. I thought it was good. And I think what we should talk about next, though, and I kind of need to jump back a little bit, because we've been talking about obviously how Christine's chasing the bullies down, but prior to that, there's a scene where that gives the impetus of why Christine is doing this, why she's out for revenge, essentially, and that's these alpha bullies find out where Arnie has kept the car Christine kept, and they sneak in and they kind of completely trash the thing, so it's completely decimated and beyond recognition, and you would think unrepairable. But this is where and I'm not sure if we discussed this yet or not, but this is where we see the entity or whatever it is that's possessing the car Christine bring life back into it again by remorphing back and shaping into this kind of pristine car again. And this is a nod to the special effects that's involved in this, and it's probably one of the big standout moments. And I know that you had something to comment on that as well, Nick.
Yeah, I love the practical effects. It still holds up really well today, considering it was made in 1983. And it's looking at it, it doesn't look reversed. You know how if someone jumps up onto a cliff, you know, you can tell that's clearly reversed, like in the old Wonder Woman days or something. But here, using the vacuum pumps to suck it out, to suck out the metal, and it's all really well hidden. All the equipment in there, and I just think it looks really. And it shows the indestructible nature and just how pristine Christine can return to. Which makes that sort of unstoppable force. But yeah, and also, you know, with practical effects as well, when with the bullies, when Christine's chasing the head bully and the car's on bloody fire. You still look at that today and going, that's still amazing imagery, like the glow on the guy being chased, and the fact it's just a car on fire at night. It's just as if it wasn't scared enough, you know, the car's on fire. That sort of adds to it. And then the revving of the engine.
That's it. Well, Radiohead once did a nod to it back in the day with their video of Karma Police, which the whole video is just the car on fire, essentially chasing this dude down the street. He's chasing him first and then it gets on fire. But anyway, so there's lots of references, is my point, that's been made since then, or nods to that particular moment. And it's a great scene. Like the moment where it, like, you know, it Christine, I'm talking about, finds the bullies. It's at a gas station initially. And this is where it then kind of just plows into the actual gas station building, knocking down one of the bullies, killing him instantly. By the way, that bully is the guy that was in Ghostbusters with the couple of wavy lines moment.
Love the afro.
Love the afro. That guy's a legend. I'll tell you what the effect is. It's pissing me off. So that I had a moment like, oh my God, it's that guy. And then he gets knocked down. And then there's another dude that works at the gas station as well. And this is where this is where the gas pump comes out, doesn't it? And this is the whole reason it kind of ignites on fire. And he gets killed in there too, where the whole gas station erupts and blows up, but not without Christine managing to get out, still on fire. And then we get, like you said, that moment where he just chases after the alpha bully. And one bit I really love in that scene is there's a bit with the audio where all you're hearing is the bully as he's running along out of breath, like this kind of panting kind of sound. And it's a real kind of eerie moment before then obviously Christine catches up with him and just completely knocks him over and kills him. It's a good scene.
It's great. And because I was wondering about the reason for the other guy being in there, if he served any purpose, like not being part of the initial gang, from what I could tell. And you get more of a sense of Christine's indestructible nature because we've already seen the larger bully, shall we say, getting crushed in the alleyway. You realise, okay, well, she is indestructible and she can, you know, start putting herself back together. You know, nothing can really stop her at this point.
No, that's exactly right. And yeah, it's a cool kind of, and I guess this is, you have to kind of give into that suspension of disbelief in order for this to work, you know, because it's one of those hard sells to have an inanimate object kind of come to life and then basically kind of chase people down and kill them. And that's what the basis of this is. But I think the way it's presented is its selling point in this, and it works. Because we see that kind of morphing phase earlier on that we described about. So before we kind of get to the climax of the film, though, and I know I'm jumping ahead a few beats, I do want to mention some of the actors that are involved in this, because the caliber of the support actors in particular are pretty high. So, like, and the first one obviously jumps off the list is the character, the detective character in it, who's actually played by Harry Dean Stanton, someone who is not only a legend, you know, but he's also a John Carpenter regular, having been in like Escape from New York. And in this, he's literally just ringing it in. Like he's only in like a handful of scenes, but it was just great to see him on screen, I felt. And
and that character is just completely underused as well, considering that could add another level of threat to I'd say heroes, but the protagonists, I guess. The cops are on their tail, and then they start going into detail about where he bought the paint from and stuff, and it seems like the cops got the nous, but he doesn't follow through with anything. So it's almost just like, is he lazy, or is there just not time in the film for him to be expanded? Is he in the book?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say. Because in the book, he serves a bit more of a. I feel like his character was a bit more fleshed out in the book, because he's the first person that realizes that there's something amiss about this car, and his immediate detective instincts makes him think it's Arnie, but Arnie always has an alibi, like when things are happening. In particular, one scene where I think it is the bully one. He's actually completely out of town, and there's proof of him being out of town as well. So it's a real, it's a big kind of a moment for him where it's like there's something not quite right, and that's where he's open to admit that there's something else that could potentially be at play here. And he even is following, he's hightailing Christine as well to try and kind of get to the end of it. I think his name in the book is Rudy Junkins. It's a different name to the one that's in the film from memory. And I'm trying to remember what happens to him at the end, because I know there's this. They create a sting essentially to try and catch Arnie in the throes of, because the Darnell character who owns the workshop is a bit sus, and he does a lot of kind of ships kind of goods across state borders and stuff. So, and he gets Arnie involved in that, and that's how they're able to basically catch Arnie. And hopefully, I think at this stage he thinks maybe it's Darnell that's going around, but there's something around about the car that's amiss anyway. But like I said, I can't remember what happens to his character at the end. Might have a bit of a. I honestly can't remember what happens. I don't remember him getting killed, but I can't say that. Oh no, he is. Hold on, he is killed. He's killed in a car crash. That's right, and I think it's because he's getting a bit too close. And so I don't think we ever see the killing, but we hear about it as a car crash moment. Yeah, and then there's a whole bit about the Darnell character. So he's the one that works. He's at the workshop, so he witnesses Christine driving in, and there's clearly nobody there. And in the film, we obviously see him go and investigate, and he gets killed in the car. But in the book, he actually does a runner, and he kind of goes to some kind of house. I can't remember if it's his house, but he ends up at a house in the hills, and Christine basically ends up finding him and then ramming in through his house and chasing him through the door. Imagine the scene in Gremlins where the dude is getting chased. It's kind of a bit like that. But in this instance, he gets kind of plowed down and killed by the car, Christine. And so at this point, Junkins is still around, the detective, and he basically assesses that's where he's like, yeah, something's really not going on here, and he suspects there's something beyond that, and he's trying to pin it. So or pin it on somebody, but he feels like it's beyond that. It's a spirit of some kind, and he's open to go, yeah, this is beyond my capability. But yeah, just going back to the Darnell character, obviously, we should mention again with support actors that he's played by Robert Prosky, and for many people, he's one of those guys you just kind of know his face. But there's a couple of that stand out for me. Obviously, there's Gremlins 2, the new batch, which he's the kind of wacky kind of presenter of like late night TV, and he takes his opportunity to kind of capitalize on that in the film of Gremlins 2, I should stress. Speaking of Gremlins, and but he was also in like what was the other couple of ones that stood out? There was a Last Action Hero.
That's just what I was going to say. Yeah. Are you just, when I saw him, I'm like, I still remember him as like this old friendly guy. And then, obviously in this movie, he's the complete opposite.
Yes,
well, not
that's right.
opposite. He's still old.
Yeah, just a bit grouchy.
That's it.
But for me, like he was, what struck me was that he played the main sergeant, Jablonowski, in Hill Street Blues, which was like a show in the mid 80s. I probably watched that show when I shouldn't have done. And my parents, I think, kind of let me, which was a bit weird. Because it has got, it'd be the equivalent, I guess, of just watching the Law and Order kind of shows today. But there were kind of some kind of grim moments in it. But anyway, he was always the main sergeant guy. So it was kind of nice to see him again. And obviously the last person we should mention is Kelly Preston, who unfortunately kind of passed away this year. And she's the kind of like bubblegum kind of girlfriend of Arnie's character, of Dennis's character early on. And so she's a cheerleader, and there's these little pockets of moments where she's clearly infatuated with the Dennis character. But as soon as Stephanie Poole kind of, I always call her Stephanie. I think her name was Stephanie in Baywatch. As soon as Alexandra Poole kind of enters the scene, Dennis's attention is elsewhere. And so there's these great moments where, particularly in memories, the scene in the library where Kelly Preston can kind of see what's happening and she feels powerless to kind of win him back again.
Yeah, it's a classic.
Yeah.
Although it kind of feels like she's sort of upset by it, but then later on in the movie, it's like she's almost not even that bothered by it.
Yeah.
I think you might see her again. And when you look at the leads page, Dennis, played by Keith Gordon, on his IMDb page, when it goes to his filmography, it comes more as for his directorial work, rather than being known for just Christine. And I think it's the same with John Stockwell, who plays Dennis.
Yes.
He's directed a few films since then. Nothing particularly great when you're looking at a CV that includes Blue Crush and Into the Blue and those sort of things. But hey, look, he's directed more films than we have. So
true, very true. Thanks for that little bit of information there. So so the point is there's a collection of cool actors in this that lend a bit more weight to the film, and I guess that's again, Carpenter is renowned for kind of gathering these kind of actors, particularly young actors that are on kind of the periphery, because obviously the biggest one up being Jamie Lee Curtis before her breakthrough, but there's been a few others along the way. And so I think we're just going to jump ahead now to the climax of the film and talk around that, because there are notable differences with the book. Because in the book, the Dennis character gets a rig. He basically gets a big rig. It's not a bulldozer, or in this case, a digger. Because he wanted something with a lot of weight. It's a beast of a thing, and he just wanted something to be able to crush Christine with. And so in the film, it's essentially what I'd call a JCB with the claw, with the digger part at the front.
Yeah.
The opening of it, of that climax, is very similar, though, in the sense that they're in the cabin of the vehicle of choice, and they do fall asleep and wake up and find out Christine is in, or has been in, the workshop the whole time without them knowing.
Yeah, hiding under a bunch of junk, which it's things like that. When you think about the physics and of what we'd have to do, like, sprout arms or magically knock stuff off shelves, or like just, and that's what you don't want to do with a film like this, is you don't want to overthink it.
No,
but it does feel a little bit comical when it's just like, and she's like, the lights come on and comes out, and and when they start having the fight, there's a great moment where I think the digger tears open Christine's front, and you get this great, very on the nose imagery of these fangs, the serrated edge of the metal on the front of the car, and it's like I said, a bit on the nose, but still it looks bloody great. Yeah,
it looks awesome. Yeah, you're exactly right. It's a delicate balancing act, isn't it, between the comical and the visual kind of component of it. And there are points where it could teeter the wrong way, but I think it just hangs right. And that's one of the moments in question that you're talking about, with the fangs. And there's similarities in it, like like the bit where Christine presents herself is when Lee has come out of the cabin of the digger, and she's going to make her way to the office. For some reason, I can't remember why she does it, but she does, and that's where it presents itself. So she's out in the open, and then that's when it goes in to try and attack her. So she does a lot of cartwheeling around, trying to get away, and then we have Dennis trying to, at the same time, crush the thing, but he's still got a gammy leg, like he's been, just lest we forget, like he's fucked his leg up. So he's finding it hard to press down on the clutch in particular to get the thing going, and he's in a lot of pain. So there's moments where that is coming about. And somehow Lee ends up getting into the office space where Darnell used to work, which is kind of like one of those open, offices where you've got windows going around the outside so you can look in, and equally he could look out onto the shop floor and see what's going on.
Similar to the film? Similar to that?
Yeah,
sort of
exactly. Similar to the film. Yeah, very much so. But the difference here is like, the big difference, I should say, is that in the film, we see Arnie actually behind the wheel, driving Christine. But in the book, that isn't the case. Arnie isn't even there. He's on he's gone on a road trip with his mum, I think. So he's out of the scene, and this is a deliberate ploy on the part of Dennis, because he wanted to make sure Arnie was out of the picture to confront Christine head on. Mm-hmm. And obviously in the film, that's not the case. We see a fully possessed up Arnie behind the wheel, and he tries to mow down Lee by crashing into the office. But in doing so, he's then thrown through the windscreen and then lands on a shard of glass, basically kind of, puncturing his, I presume he's some vital organ.
Something important.
Yeah. That brings about his demise. Which is
with a weird jump scare. Where he sort of just tries to sort of grab her, but it looks like he's supposed to be cuddling her, because this is like his moment of redemption or something, or, where he then becomes unpossessed or something.
It's a weird one, because like I said, and I'll get to the difference in the book in a bit, but just touching base still on what happens in the film, is because within that moment, then Christine, you wonder the reason why Christine would allow that to happen, that scenario to unfold, to separate herself from the entity that is inside Arnie, or has possessed him. Because obviously, I think I mentioned earlier, like in the book, he's possessed by Roland DeBay, the previous owner who had died. So there is a deliberate separation anyway, but in the film, they don't. They combine the two. And so by doing that, and then when Christine reverses back out again, you're kind of like, what are you going to do now? You've got nothing. You've got nothing human or within this world to hold you there to kind of get away with the stuff that you're trying to do. Like, how are you going to then just lie in dormant and wait for somebody to find you again to build you up? I don't know. It just seemed like a bit of an odd choice to make.
Yeah, because there was no, in the film, definitely there's no turning point where, maybe he would have turned against Christine, and that would have given her reason to kill him. It's just like everything, she's winning, everything's going about normal, then maybe she's just done with it. Yeah,
like with this ending though, like he's really the funny bit with him, the car pulling away, and I think the song that's played is over the top, is called "Pledging My Love" or something, which it's a bit of a swan song kind of devotion to Arnie. Which is a bit tongue in cheek in itself.
It is very much so, but it's kind of fun, and they do that throughout the film with a lot of the music. But I think
that's right, which is in the book too. There's lots of pop culture references. But then right at the very end, like basically to kind of round up the very end of this film, we get the kind of climax between basically the digger and Christine, and Dennis just basically ends up decimating Christine once again and crushing her with the digger driving over it, basically unrecognizable. And then we get the very, very kind of last shot of but they think it's all over, and we get the last shot of Lee and Dennis and the cop Harry Dean's back again, and they presented with the cube, of the squash cube of Christine, and it hangs on that, and then we get that kind of one lingering shot where you kind of see a little bit of, I think it's the bumper that's still kind of prominent, and it kind of vibrates a little bit, so you kind of get this impression of that, is it actually all over or not?
And you have the great audio cue of, the radio still going inside, but it's just a guy walking past with a ghetto blaster.
Yeah, that's
so,
right.
It's definitely not 100% straight. There's a little bit of comedy thrown in there.
There is a bit. That's right. So like the key thing here though, like, is that touches on what happens in the novel. And to go back to what I was saying about Arnie's character, is that his character actually gets killed off screen, so to speak, off page. We don't actually see his death. Like, so there's a moment where so Dennis has gone through all this ordeal to destroy the car to try and save the soul of his best friend, but it's of no use because he finds out that both Arnie and Arnie's mum are killed in a car accident. So it's almost hinting that maybe Roland DeBay kind of did this just prior to Christine's demise. So Roland being the previous owner of the car.
Oh, yeah, because
he's the one that's possessed Arnie, So there's this one moment where they reckon, so it's hinting that he was able to perform that before this all kind of transpired. So Arnie's dead, like he's killed off. Yeah, so it's kind of deliberately left open, and that's what that last scene is a nod to in the film. With those kind of last moments. So yeah, that's kind of the end of the film. That's how it kind of it bows out. So I always ask this of my co-hosts about whether or not it stands up as a film first and foremost. So where do you kind of rate this as a film? Do you what are your thoughts as it is today?
I definitely liked it way more than I thought I would.
Yeah.
Because the problem I have going to a movie like this is I still remember the one scene or the one thing about it, and I feel like everything's leading up to that point. And but yeah, with this one, it was great because I thought it would be a bit more farcical, a bit more tongue in cheek, and it kind of was, but it also wasn't an outright horror either way. So it's the way I think about what makes it a good film is, would I want to rush back and watch it again? This one, not particularly. I feel like I've ticked it off the box. It's great. And also, if I had to recommend it, I'd be hard pushed on who I'd recommend it to.
Yes.
Because it's not really an outright comedy. It's definitely not really a horror. Like it's the same before, they just throw in a few swear words to try and bump it up because there's not a lot of gore. Or anything even particularly scary about it. Like it's very obviously intimidating when you hear the car revving and the engines, and the car's coming towards you. But for me, I definitely actually enjoyed it way more than I thought. And that's a good thing with going back and watching Carpenter when he does films with amazing practical effects, is you can still look at that and go, wow, that's incredible. I know how they do it, but it still looks incredible.
Yeah. I agree with that. And I think the effects kind of helps this film. But I do have this thing, and I am going to be doing this because just to recap what I was saying at the very beginning of the podcast, is that we're now looking at basically the latter end of Carpenter's work, starting with Christine. So we've done his previous films. But it's like you were saying, like, he's done so many great films, but I wouldn't necessarily, if somebody said to me, recommend a John Carpenter film, I wouldn't automatically go and say Christine off the bat. Right? So, and for that, this film is a solid enough film, and it's fine. It's an okay film, but I wouldn't say it's up at the caliber that we've been used to seeing Carpenter prior to this. Because let's just go back the last kind of 4 films he did prior to this. We had Halloween, then The Fog, Escape from New York, and then The Thing. And this is his next film. And I want to say that this is the first indication of him slightly dropping in his caliber of standards. We get Starman next, which was a bit of a showpiece, and arguably some people didn't necessarily connect with that, but then we'll talk about that in the next podcast. But the one straight after that is Big Trouble in Little China, which, to me is lifting the standards back up again of Carpenter's work, right?
God, yeah, one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's an awesome film. And then we get Prince of Darkness and They Live. So great films. So like it's almost I want to say Christine's that one moment where we start to see, maybe he's not quite got the goods for the long term. And then he turns around and disproves it up until 1992, where we get Memoirs of an Invisible Man. And then we'll talk about that in a later podcast too. And I won't give away too much of my thoughts on that. But my point is so like when you look at it, so going back to what I said, like when you say John Carpenter, it's not, and Chris, I wouldn't necessarily reach up to, grab the DVD or Blu-ray off the shelf and say, oh yeah, here, watch this one.
I had no idea it was him, to be honest, before we did the podcast.
I guess that's the point, right? So it's so, I think, would I recommend it? I don't know. I probably wouldn't unless you're either a King fan or a Carpenter fan. I'd probably go, oh, you haven't checked that out? You should check it out. Yeah. Or if you've only just discovered Stephen King lately, because obviously It Chapter 2 that was released, and you aren't familiar with his work and want to delve back into some of his stuff and like what he does, go check it out. You might be a little bit disappointed, but I think it's worth checking. But yeah, that's kind of where we land with that. So yeah, that kind of wraps us up. I think we're at a point where we can kind of bow out and conclude our discussions of John Carpenter's Christine. We do hope you enjoyed listening to us talk about this film. And if you have alternate views on it, or if you think it's highly recommended, or maybe we're slamming it a little bit too much or not enough, let us know at the usual social platforms that we have out there on Insta and Facebook and Twitter. Until then, I'm your host, Saul Muerte, and I'd like to extend my thanks again to my co-host, Nick Allford.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Until then, goodbye.
You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Music supplied by Peter Nezik. For more discussions or podcasts, head over to surgeonsofhorror.com or head over to our Facebook and Twitter sites for the latest news and updates.